Don't tell me she invited him. The words sliced through the whispers as an elderly man stepped into the chapel frayed coat, worn shoes, silver hair combed with care. Someone scoffed, "Is he here for food? I knew Claire was kind. But this is just sad." The room turned cold, eyes averted. A silent judgment passed. From the bridal room, Claire Thompson froze. Through the cracked door, she saw him. Mr. Walker. Same man. Same bench. 6 years. Never a word. But she had seen him every morning. And now? He was here. She didn't wait. Lifting her gown, ignoring her planner's cries, she ran. Claire, her fiancé, shouted, "What are you doing?" She didn't turn. She reached the man and embraced him. Hard. Like she'd been waiting years. Guests stared. A glass shattered. Is he homeless? No one answered, because just then 12 Marines in full-dress blues marched through the doors, boots gleaming, gloves immaculate. They lined up in perfect formation and saluted the bride. Every eye turned. Every whisper stopped. They weren't here for wedding cake. They were here for something deeper. To honor what the world missed, but she saw every single day. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. We love seeing how far kindness travels. Claire Thompson wasn't the kind of person who drew attention. At the Flagstaff Public Library, she was known for her quiet smile and her habit of shelving books by hand, even when the automated system offered to do it faster. She liked the feel of worn covers, the smell of old pages. And she believed that even the most forgotten stories deserved to be touched by human hands. Claire lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment above a flower shop. Her days followed a quiet rhythm morning coffee from the same local cafe, long hours at the library, and a slow walk home, always passing through Aspen Street just before sunrise. That's where she first noticed him. He sat on the same bench every morning just outside the old courthouse building. Gray coat, hunched shoulders, a duffel bag at his feet, and a gaze that stayed low. He never asked for money, never spoke, just sat. She didn't know why she stopped the first time. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way he looked, like a man waiting for something or someone who never came. The next morning, Claire left a granola bar and a small coffee on the bench before work. No note, no explanation. He didn't touch it that day. But the next morning, it was gone. So she did it again. And again. For 6 years. She never asked his name. He never offered it. Others noticed. Some co-workers teased. Feeding the ghosts, now Claire. Her supervisor once pulled her aside. "Be careful," he warned gently. "It's kind, sure, but don't let people take advantage." Claire had just smiled, because to her it wasn't about being kind. It was about being present. She didn't see a vagrant. She saw a man with tired eyes and a quiet dignity. A man the world had walked past. Every small coffee was a reminder you still exist. In a town where no one really looks, Claire saw him. And quietly, day after day, she chose not to look away. Not everyone understood. At first, no one paid much attention to Claire's small act of kindness, but over time, whispers found their way through the library's echoing hallways and into the break room. Still feeding your imaginary friend a co-worker once laughed not unkindly, but not kindly either. Another muttered, "You know those people talk. One day he'll turn on her." Claire never answered. She didn't need to. But not all the comments were quiet. One winter morning, when Claire arrived early with a paper bag and thermos, a woman walking her dog stopped and stared. "You know you're encouraging the problem, right?" she said. "They stay homeless because people like you make it comfortable." Claire nodded politely and kept walking. Even her mother had doubts. Over dinner one evening after meeting Claire's fiancé Ben, she sighed. "You've always had a soft heart, Claire," she said, pouring more tea. "But this is something else. You can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save him," Claire replied. "I'm just trying not to ignore him." Ben understood in a way no one else seemed to. A high school history teacher, he'd seen the invisible students, the ones who came to class hungry, who disappeared mid-semester, whose silence said more than words ever could. Sometimes, he told her, the smallest acts are the only ones that matter. But not everyone saw it that way. 3 months before the wedding, a new hire at the library caught Claire slipping out early one morning. He watched her place the food on the bench, then return through the back staff entrance. Later, she overheard him speaking to another librarian loud enough for her to hear. "She's been feeding that guy for years, every single day. Like it actually makes a difference." That one stung. Not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it was so blind. They couldn't see what Claire saw. They saw a problem, a burden, a cautionary tale in human form. She saw a man holding on. A week later, it snowed for the first time that winter. Thick flakes drifted down like ash. Mr. Walker sat on his usual bench, shivering, no gloves collar pulled high. Claire had been wearing her favorite scarf, thick wool forest green, a gift from Ben. She took it off and left it with the coffee, tucking it gently over the bag. The next morning, the scarf was gone. But on the back of a napkin in shaky handwriting were 6 words, "Thank you for seeing me human." Claire folded it carefully, placed it in her wallet, and never forgot. The note stayed in Claire's wallet like a pressed flower, fragile, faded, but full of life. Whenever the days felt too long, the world too loud, or the people too unkind, she would unfold that napkin and read the words again. "Thank you for seeing me human." It wasn't just gratitude. It was a mirror reflecting back what Claire had always believed, that acknowledgement, not charity, is the first step toward dignity. So she kept showing up, through storms and heat waves, through holidays and heartbreaks. Claire left breakfast at the same bench, always quietly, always early. She rotated through simple offerings, a boiled egg, a croissant, fresh fruit, always a cup of coffee. Never too much, never too little. Just enough to say you are still part of this world. And then, as her wedding day approached, Claire made one quiet change. She told no one, not even Ben, but she added a small hand-drawn invitation to one of the coffee cups. It wasn't formal, just a note that read, "If you feel like joining us, June 4th, St. Mark's Chapel. I'd be happy to see you there." No name, no RSVP, just a door left slightly open. Ben noticed her nervous energy in the days leading up to the wedding. When he asked, she brushed it off. "Just a lot on my mind," she said. But her thoughts weren't on the dress, or the flowers, or even the vows. They were on the man at the bench, on the scarf he had worn more days than not since she gave it to him. On the way, his hands trembled slightly when he held the paper cup, but always steadied before he took a sip. On how he never missed a single morning, no matter the weather. 2 days before the wedding, Claire received a letter, hand-delivered to the library by someone she didn't recognize. No return address. No sender's name. Inside was a small card, handwritten in firm, practiced script. "Tomorrow I will come. Not for cake, but to honor a debt." She read it 3 times before folding it back into the envelope. That night, Ben found her sitting by the window, staring into the dark, with the letter clutched in her hand. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Claire nodded, but didn't explain. Not yet. She didn't want to raise expectations. She didn't want to make it about her. Because it never had been. It was about the man no one saw, and the life she wasn't sure she had helped change, but had quietly refused to ignore. And now, maybe he was ready to be seen. The morning of June 4th was warm for Flagstaff, with sunlight spilling through the pine trees and a breeze that stirred the chapel's ribbons like whispered prayers. Inside the bridal suite at St. Mark's Chapel, Claire adjusted her veil in the mirror, trying to quiet the storm inside her chest. Her bridesmaids chatted behind her, light laughter filling the room, but Claire's mind was elsewhere. She had barely slept. The letter, "I will come," to honor a debt weighed on her more than the dress. Was it him? Was it really Mr. Walker? Would he come through the frosted window? She could see guests arriving. Ben's family from Phoenix, her friends from the library, teachers from Ben's school, all dressed in their best, all smiles and soft footsteps. Then she saw him, standing awkwardly near the chapel entrance, away from the crowd, wearing what looked like an old suit, carefully pressed, though it had clearly seen better days. His shoes were worn, but polished, his silver hair combed neatly. He looked smaller, somehow, thinner, but there was something unmistakably dignified in the way he stood. Claire's breath caught. It was him. "Don't tell me she invited him to the wedding," someone muttered in the crowd. A woman near the front clutched her pearls. "Is he here to beg? At a wedding?" Another shook her head. I knew Claire was kind, but this is unsettling. Claire could hear them. Their voices weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. The judgment hung in the air like fog, thick and heavy. And then she moved. Without thinking about the music cue, the waiting guests, or the photographer adjusting his lens, Claire gathered her dress in her hands and bolted from the bridal suite. Claire, her wedding planner, gasped. "Claire, wait!" Ben's voice echoed from the chapel hall. But she didn't stop. She pushed open the side door, stepped into the sunlight, and walked fast toward him. "Fartsoda," Walker turned as she approached, surprise flickering in his eyes. And then recognition. Claire reached him and threw her arms around him. He froze for a second. Then slowly, his arms returned the embrace. "I remember your eyes," Claire whispered. "The first time, 6 years ago." He smiled, a small, almost shy smile that softened every line on his weathered face. "And I remember every single morning," he said, voice steadier than she expected, "when you made me feel like a human being again." She linked her arm through his. "Come inside." Inside the chapel, the whispers had grown into confused murmurs. Who was he? Why was the bride escorting a homeless man into the ceremony? Even the officiant hesitated. Then a sound. Engines. Several. Sharp and synchronized. 12 military vehicles pulled up to the curb. The double doors swung open. Gasps. 12 United States Marines stepped into the church, dressed in full ceremonial blues. Boots polished. Gloves white. Faces solemn. They marched down the center aisle in formation, silent, precise, like a current of history moving through the room. The lead Marine, a captain with the name Duncan on his nameplate, halted before Claire and Mr. Walker. He stood tall, saluted sharply, and spoke loud enough for every soul in the chapel to hear. On behalf of Alpha Company 3rd Battalion 5th Marines, he said, "We are here to honor the woman who sustained a hero." Silently. For 6 years. Silence. You could hear someone drop a champagne flute. Claire blinked. Duncan turned to the man at her side. "This," he continued, "is Sergeant Henry Walker, decorated war hero, recipient of the Silver Star for saving 9 Marines during an ambush in Fallujah, 2004. Murmurs rippled across the pews. People who had been whispering moments ago now sat frozen. "He carried me 4 blocks under fire," Duncan added, voice thickening. "I was bleeding out. He went back 8 more times after me, wounded himself, and never claimed his medal." Claire looked at Mr. Walker, Sergeant Walker, stunned. "I never knew," she whispered. "That was the point," he said quietly. "I didn't want to be thanked. Not after losing my wife and daughter. I couldn't bear to be seen as a hero, when I couldn't even save my own family." His voice cracked, but he continued. "But you never asked, never needed a reason. You just saw me. You gave me a reason to keep waking up." The 12 Marines formed a silent guard of honor from the door to the altar. Duncan turned to the guests. "She didn't know he was a hero," he said. "She helped him not because of what he had done, but because he was human. And in doing so, she saved a soldier who had already saved so many." The chapel stood still. No one whispered now. And in that stillness, Claire Thompson, a librarian who believed in forgotten stories, became the center of one. The silence in the chapel hung heavy, not from discomfort anymore, but from awe. Guests who had shuffled in with assumptions now sat unmoving eyes fixed on the man they had dismissed and the woman who had simply seen him. Captain Duncan stepped aside as another Marine approached, carrying a dark wooden shadow box. Inside it, a weathered silver star, a folded flag, and a faded photograph. Claire stepped closer. The photo showed a younger Henry Walker face streaked with dust and blood, carrying another Marine through a ruined street chaos in the background. And just behind them, unmistakably, was a younger Captain Duncan, his arms slung over Walker's shoulder, eyes half-lidded from pain. "He carried me," Duncan said, voice low, reverent. And then he went back again and again for the others. And then he disappeared. Walker looked down. "I didn't want to be found." He glanced at Claire. But somehow she did. Claire took a slow breath. "I never asked who you were, and that's why I came back," he said. There was a pause. Then Walker reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue. He unfolded it gently, revealing a laminated napkin. Claire recognized it immediately. The note he'd written. "Thank you for seeing me human." He handed it to her. "I kept it. I wanted to give it back today," he said. "Along with the only gifts I have left, my presence, my truth, and my gratitude. I heard you mention the wedding once, weeks ago," he added. "To a teenager asking about library card renewals? I remembered the date. I hoped you wouldn't mind if I reached out." Claire swallowed tears slipping freely now. "You brought them," she whispered. Walker gave the smallest smile. "Old friends. They owed me favors. I told them I owed you something far greater." Ben, who had stood in quiet witness near the altar, stepped forward now. His voice was calm but full. "Sir," he said, offering his hand, "it would be the greatest honor if you would walk Claire down the aisle." There was no dramatic music, no applause, just 12 Marines parting gently to make a path, and a man once forgotten now standing tall, taking his place beside a woman who had never asked for anything in return. As they began to walk, one of Claire's co-workers, the same one who had once joked about feeding ghosts, rose to her feet. Tears lined her cheeks. "I work with Claire," she said, voice trembling. "She used to come in early, to bake muffins, and wrap them just right, using her own money. For him, she never told anyone." Another voice joined in her supervisor. We didn't see," he admitted. "But she did." A guest stood up. Then another. Heads bowed. A soft, collective breath filled the room like a quiet apology. Captain Duncan faced the crowd one last time. "In the Marine Corps we have a saying, 'Never leave a man behind,'" he said. Claire Thompson never wore a uniform, but she lived that principle every single day. Claire reached the altar standing now, with both men at her side, one who had seen her heart from the beginning, and one who had found life again because of it. The chapel, once full of assumptions and silence, had become something else entirely. A place of remembrance, of humility, of deep, quiet grace. After the ceremony, the celebration resumed. There were toasts, dancing, laughter, but through it all, eyes kept returning to the man in the worn suit and the 12 Marines who never strayed far from him. Henry Walker didn't linger in the spotlight. He stood near the edges, quiet hands folded in front of him. But when Claire approached with a slice of cake, he accepted it like a folded flag with both hands and quiet reverence. "I thought you said you weren't coming for cake," she teased gently. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "This one's special." They stood for a long moment, saying nothing. Then Walker spoke again. "I used to think I had nothing left to give, not after everything I lost. But you reminded me that being alive, just being seen, is enough. You gave me back something I didn't even know I still wanted a place in this world." Claire's hands trembled slightly as she held her bouquet. "You gave me something too," she said. "You taught me that kindness doesn't need an audience." Walker looked around the room at the Marines laughing with Ben, at the guests who now approached him not with judgment, but curiosity, respect. "You gave all of them something," he said quietly. That night, as the last guests left and the music faded into silence, Walker approached Ben and Claire one final time. "I won't be in town long," he said, "but I didn't want to leave without giving you a wedding gift." He handed Claire a worn envelope. Inside was a note. Short, simple, use it for others. The way you used it for me. And tucked behind it, a check. Not large by some standards, but generous for someone who had spent years with nothing. "I started receiving my VA benefits again," Walker said. "I don't need much, but I know someone out there needs breakfast. Maybe a scarf. Maybe just a table where no one stares." Claire nodded slowly, heart full. "We'll build it," she promised. And she meant it. Because some gifts aren't wrapped. Some gifts are legacies. Claire and Ben didn't go back to normal life after the honeymoon. Instead, they built something new, small, humble, but steady. Using Walker's gift and their own wedding funds, they opened a quiet breakfast corner in the back room of a local community center. They named it the Quiet Table. There were no posters, no website, no social media buzz, just a simple wooden sign above the door. Feeding one person feeds an entire life that might otherwise be forgotten. They opened every morning at 6. No questions asked, no names required, just hot coffee, warm food, and a place to sit without being judged. And people came. Veterans, widows, runaways, men with lined faces and hands that trembled when they reached for a cup. Women who hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Teenagers with nowhere else to go. They came because someone had made space for them. And every month, like clockwork, a postcard arrived. Always from a different city. Always signed the same way. Every breakfast is a salute. "Thank you, Claire." Walker never returned to Flagstaff. But, in a way, he never left. Captain Duncan explained that Walker had finally reconnected with the VA, receiving counseling and permanent housing through contacts in the Corps. He was traveling again, not to run away, but to reach out. And then, one morning a year, to the day after the wedding, 12 familiar faces appeared at the Quiet Table. No uniforms this time, just jeans and jackets, each one holding a single flower. "We'll be taking shifts volunteering here," Duncan announced, smiling. "This isn't a story we'll let fade." Claire didn't say much. She didn't need to. She just opened the door. And the table grew longer. Above the serving counter at the Quiet Table, framed in simple oak, hangs an old napkin. Faded, but still legible. "Thank you for seeing me human." Beneath it, Claire added a second message, her own. "Everyone who sits at this table has a story worth knowing. Reporters eventually caught wind of the place. A local news crew asked Claire for an interview. She politely declined. "Talk to the veterans," she said. "It's never been about me." On hard mornings when supplies ran low or volunteers didn't show, Claire would remember that day at the chapel. 12 Marines standing at attention for a simple act of daily kindness. That was all the motivation she ever needed. Ben understood. He always had. "Marrying you," he told her once as they wiped down tables in the evening light, "was like marrying into a second family. One I never saw coming." Claire smiled. "The best kind of family," she said softly. "The kind you don't have to earn. Just see." In a world obsessed with headlines and heroes in capes, Claire reminded us of something simpler, that real heroism lives in small acts, and that sometimes the person who saved the most lives is the one who simply brought breakfast. Have you ever done something small that made a big difference for someone else, even if no one noticed? Share your story in the comments. You never know who it might inspire.